Appearing tonight, Governor Larry Hogan, Samantha Bee, Ibram X. Kendi, Padma Lakshmi, Bob Woodward, and Reverend William Barber. The Atlantic Festival is brought to you through the generous support of Facebook, Genentech, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Walton Family Foundation, Allstate, Eli Lilly and Company, U.S. Bank, AARP, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ExxonMobil, John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Nestle Waters North America, and PayPal.
Good evening. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. I want to thank you again for participating in our all-digital festival. We've covered a lot of subjects on our virtual stage, and I'm very glad you can join us, and I hope next year we'll get to see you live in person. Over the past few nights, we've explored the tumultuous events of 2020. We've talked about the polarization that has crippled our politics, the struggle to contain COVID-19, tensions over race and class, and even the assault on truth itself. Tonight is our closing evening. We'll jump into some of the biggest questions we face as a country: who we are, what does it mean to be an American, and where we are heading. I hope you enjoyed tonight's conversations.
Welcome Atlantic staff writer McKay Coppins.
Early in the pandemic, a handful of the nation's governors imposed strict shutdown orders, closing schools and businesses to stop the spread of the coronavirus. These orders have since been rolled back as those states are recovering. One of those early actors was Republican Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland. Governor Hogan, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, so we have people watching from all over the world. Could you start by just giving us the latest on the coronavirus in Maryland? How are things going in your state?
Well, thanks to our early and aggressive actions and thanks to the people of Maryland being so diligent, we're really doing very well. We've continued to have steadily declining numbers, and we're down to about 2.5% positivity rate. Our cases per 100,000 is dropping. Our hospitalizations are down. Our deaths are down. And, you know, this virus is by no means behind us, and we continue to stay vigilant. But we're very pleased with where we are now, and we're down in much better shape than many of our neighbors and many of my fellow governors across the country. So we're going to continue to work to keep it that way.
Are you worried, as a lot of public health experts and government officials are, about this fall and especially this winter, where we're going to be contending with both the coronavirus and the seasonal flu? How are you preparing for that?
Well, it's a big concern, and I know that Dr. Fauci and a number of other, really smart public health experts are concerned. Many of we have a coronavirus recovery task force made up of some of the smartest epidemiologists and public health doctors and scientists here in our state of Maryland. We're all concerned, and we're looking at the confluence when it gets colder and more people are inside. When we have the confluence of the flu with the COVID-19, so we're working very hard on it. We've now switched over in our Maryland lab to testing that can do both the test for the flu and for COVID. We've been working on rapid antigen testing, and we're going to continue to work for a safe and effective reopening while really staying concerned about how things might change in the fall.
One of the most striking things about the coronavirus response has been the lack of kind of a cohesive federal response, right? To a certain degree, it's been 50 different approaches in 50 different states. How has the pandemic changed the relationship, in your view, between the states and the federal government?
Well, it's been an interesting challenge for all of us at the federal, state, and local level. I had an interesting perspective on this because I had the honor of chairing the nation's governors during this pandemic as head of the National Governors Association. So I had to work very closely with the White House and the cabinet, along with all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle all across the country. And there are certain things that the federal government does really well, and Those of us in the States, we were in different situations. We all took different actions, but it was a bit of a patchwork. But I can say one of the things I'm most proud of is how well the governors, really across America, both Democrats and Republicans, really stepped up and led on this crisis, and how well we worked together. It was really a collaborative, nonpartisan kind of an effort. And we try to work as best we could with our federal partners and our local leaders as well.
Do you think this was the ideal situation, though? Would it have been easier for you as a governor if there had been a more kind of concerted and coherent response and guidelines from the federal government?
Well, I was an early critic, coming up and talking about when I thought things were not happening at the federal level. I think they have dramatically improved their response in many ways, but at the beginning of the crisis, every state was kind of on their own with trying to track down desperately needed PPE and testing supplies, and in a very constrained market. We had 50 states competing against one another, competing against the federal government, and competing with other countries around the world. And it was a crazy situation that we had to contend with. But there have been many improvements since then, and we pushed, the Governors Association pushed for the utilization of the Defense Production Act. We pushed for more and more assistance from the federal government on PPE and testing, and I think we've made some improvements since then, but there's no question, I think we could have done things better in the early stages of this crisis, no doubt about that.
From where you're sitting, when do you think things will return to a pre-pandemic normal or something, resembling that? That is kind of the question that everyone has. Probably most of your constituents are wondering about. Well, what is the timeline that you have in your mind?
Well, I think everybody in America probably has that same question, and quite frankly, I don't think we know the answers, but I think we're not going to we're all trying to get back to normal as much as we possibly can, but we want to do so in a safe way without seeing the spikes that you were talking about that we're concerned about in the fall. But I don't think we're really going to get back to normal until we can get widespread rapid testing, which we are working very well with a number of our colleagues and with the federal government and governors across the country, and until we get a vaccine. And I'm proud that I think Operation Warp Speed has been really helping to invest in a number of biopharma companies who are making real progress. We have 40 different companies and or universities in my state of Maryland who are working on that. We had a big announcement today at one of those companies, Novavax, that is in phase 2, about to start phase 3 trials on a vaccine. And that's really what it's going to take, is widespread vaccines and rapid testing to enable us to get our economy back on track and kids back in schools and universities and have people feel a real sense of normalcy.
Are you concerned that you might struggle to get a critical mass of people to take the vaccine? What would be your message to your constituents who are reluctant or unsure of the vaccine? Polls show that a lot of people are not sure that they will take it.
Well, it's going to be an important issue. I mean, really, the only way we're going to protect ourselves is with a safe vaccine that works. And that's why there's so many companies in our state and across America and around the world that are working so hard on this. And we certainly don't want to rush anything. We want to get it done as quickly as possible, but we want to do it in a safe way that people trust the process. And we're going to do everything we can to encourage people to get vaccinated. I understand there's a lot of concern and hesitation on the parts of some people, but I think most people in America, and certainly most people in our state, are going to want to be vaccinated and keep themselves safe.
I don't think we can neglect the fact that we are just weeks away from an election. And you have kind of an interesting role as a Republican governor who's one of relatively few Republican officials who's been willing to break ranks with this president from time to criticize his policies where you think it's appropriate. Your record in Maryland shows that you've had unique success for a Republican in winning support from not just independents and Republicans, but also Democrats, African American voters. You kind of are doing something that your party has struggled to do for a long time. Do you have any advice for President Trump as he finishes these last few weeks of the election and kind of tries to make his closing argument. What would you say to him? What would your advice be?
Well, I'm not sure President Trump really is going to take a lot of advice from me, but I've given quite a bit of advice over the past 4 years. Much of it wasn't really followed, but you're right. I believe our party needs to do a much better job of reaching out away from just the base that the president has been doing a good job of appealing to, but reaching across the aisle and trying to have a message that talks to people in the middle. Like most people in America have their minds made up. They're very strongly on one side or the other, but this election is going to be decided by those people in the middle, and those independents and discerning Democrats and those Republicans who are currently not pleased with the president. And both candidates really have to go after and make their case over the next few weeks. But I think it's important for our party to do a better job, as we have done here in the bluest state in America, of winning over and talking to folks that maybe that the president hasn't been really speaking to.
Are you worried about the efforts and things that the president has said in recent days and weeks that would sow, doubt about the legitimacy of this election? We're obviously in an unprecedented situation with an election during a pandemic. Are you concerned that what he's been saying about mail-in voting, for example, is going to create kind of a crisis of legitimacy around the election?
Well, I think it's very dangerous for the president to use some of the rhetoric he's been using lately about questioning the trust in the election, having people be concerned about. We've been doing mail-in voting, absentee voting here in Maryland for 20-some years. We're sending out ballot applications to every single voter. It's worked very well, but I'm just concerned about some of the president's comments about that he just have made in the past few days. All of us want to see a free and fair election. It's the most important thing. It's bigger than any one person. It's bigger than the president. It's the most important thing to everybody in America to make sure that we can believe in our democratic process. And I think we all have to work to make sure the election is conducted fairly, that everyone's vote is cast and heard and counted properly. And I don't think it's helpful to make people concerned about that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask. As a state leader, what are you doing to make sure that the integrity of the election is sound, that the election is fair, and are these comments by the president making that job more difficult?
Well, it's a difficult job, but I think governors across the country are working hard to make sure that the elections are conducted fairly in every state, and that but there are definitely challenges in the middle of this COVID crisis, and we're trying to encourage people to vote by mail if they're able to, and that's the way they want to vote. We also have 8 days of early voting. We've got voting centers, so we're encouraging people to take advantage of that. And if they feel that they want to go cast their vote on Election Day, we're going to be able to do that in our state safely as well. We're encouraging people to vote at off-peak times because we don't want to have a crowded polling places. And we're going to, the election, the State Board of Elections is completely independent of the governor, which is the way it should be to ensure fair elections. But we're pushing to provide as much help as we can to them, and we're pushing them to make sure that they're doing everything possible to ensure that every single vote is counted and that we have faith in the results of the election.
As you look forward, even beyond this election, do you see, I know you talk a lot about, you just mentioned the Republican Party needing to reach out to new voters. We've gone through a period where the Republican Party seems to be moving in the opposite direction, at least at the national level. How much hope do you have that the party will drift back in your direction? I mean, what is it going to take for the party to revise its approach to people of color, to women, to younger voters? It seems like it's more than just a few people like you speaking out. It'll take some structural changes, right?
Well, I think that regardless of what happens in the election in November, that the Republican Party, we're going to have to do some soul searching and and take a look at what direction we're going to head. And I think that's going to be an interesting debate that we have. But you can't continue to win national elections and to be a competitive party if you're alienating, more and more people. And I've made a tremendous effort here in Maryland we've won suburban women and minority voters and won over Democrats and independents. And, successful politics is about addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division. And you've got to find a way to talk to people and listen to people and let them know that you're concerned and that you care about all of them, and you're going to try to do your best to solve the problems. And I think the party has a choice. So we're going to be at a crossroads. Are we going to continue in the direction we've been? Is it going to be the party of Donald Trump? Or are we going to return to a more traditional Republican Party? And I'm hoping to be a part of that conversation after November.
Governor Larry Hogan, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate being with you. Thanks.
Welcome Atlantic contributing writer Jamel Hill.
Thanks for joining us here at Atlantic Festival. I'm really very pleased to sit down with our guest today. For a lot of us that are in media, this has been a really bizarre time, but it's also forced us to become more of a one-man or one-woman band than we normally have. And so my guest today is somebody who has had the challenge of trying to produce a successful late-night show, still relying on several important elements, a production team, or I should say without relying on these elements, a production team, a live audience, all the bells and whistles that normally come with producing a late night show. When the host and the entire staff and crew are forced out of studio and into isolation, well, that definitely forces them to be creative. And so we're going to find out in just a moment from one terrific late night host how she has handled COVID-19 and still producing awesome content. So here to discuss how she's made it work from home and with her show, I am joined by the host of Full Frontal, Samantha Bee. Samantha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited I love talking to you, as you know. So this is a thrill for me. I like to I'm seeing you. I love it.
I know this is great because the last time we talked, I don't think we were. It was a podcast, so it was audio, so we didn't get a chance to actually connect face to face.
I like it. All right.
Yeah, this is so as I mentioned in the intro, people like yourself, you're forced to do something that you had not been planning on doing at all. And so why don't you just start there and tell us when COVID happened and it obviously presented some challenges for you as a late night host, what were sort of your initial thoughts about how you were going to handle putting out content during this time?
Well, we didn't know when COVID first really kind of struck our world. We had a show on March 12th. It was a Wednesday in our studio. And while we were in the studio filming the show, everything was getting shut down around us. So that was that really big, really, really dramatic week. So our office building got shut down around us and the studio got shut down around us. So we were the last show taping in the studio that day. And when we were done, everybody were like, we had done the show without an audience that day. And when we were finished for the day, they were like, that was so great. We let you finish, but you have to get out right now. And so we kind of fled the building, grabbed equipment, grabbed whatever we could along the way. And we found ourselves, a couple of days later, my husband and my kids and I we have a house just outside town. So we came to the house and we were like, what happens now? We obviously can't do a show this week. So we took one show off the calendar and it was massive anxiety. Everybody had gone into the office and taken their laptops or taken whatever they could take, but we didn't really have any presumption or knowledge that we could build a show outside of our studio world. So it took a couple of days. But it really only took a couple of days because my husband's a television person too, and he's a television director. It really only took a couple of days before we were like, should we shoot something? Should we just do it? Should we just start filming things? And we did, and it worked well. And it was, it was a weird process. I mean, we shot everything on a phone, but it was kind of a proof of concept that we could do more than we thought we could do if we just used the open space of our backyard and the natural light of the sun and literally an iPhone. And that's kind of the tiniest kernel of how we started to build the idea of shooting the entire show in the backyard, which we ended up doing.
So how did it feel for you, as the talent, as we call it in our business, to be shooting without your normal resources? Like, how did that feel for you?
Well, it was really only a technical limitation because all of my resources were still in place in a way, but everybody, like every single person was obviously working from home, but we still had, all the writers were working from home and all of the editors were working from home and all of the producers were working from home. So it was definitely, everyone was still firing on all cylinders, and we all, I think, had a sense, and I really, really had a sense that we needed to start making the show pretty much right away. Like, we took the one show off the calendar, but I felt like, one thing you're always trying to do in this business is prove that you're vital, is prove that your show is needed. Because the moment you kind of like go off the schedule for a few weeks, everyone goes, well, I don't really miss it. No, that's fine. I'm okay without it. So I was like, we need to put one foot in front of the other every single day and build this show and make it work. And everybody I work with, like, I have an incredible team. Everybody was just like, we'll try it. All right, we're doing it. We're trying it. And so bit by bit, we just kind of got technically more able to do it. We started to understand the process. Honestly, the biggest hurdle for us was me figuring out how to upload all of the footage, because my internet is not great where I'm living. So actually, we had all this footage. The first time we did it, I had all this footage on an iPhone 11 and I'm just in tears. The files are not uploading. It's just like a crisis call with our incredible tech crew. They're like, it's okay, it can go in a shared drive. I'm like, what's a shared drive? Like, I've learned so much about just a technical production. And now we're innovating. I feel like our producing team is so incredible. They're just finding ways to innovate and build new systems, because this world is going to be with us. We're in this world. So we're trying to truly live in it now and just kind of do the best job possible. And I say that from still filming in my guest bedroom where my dad sleeps and my cat's over there. And I'm like, I'm right up onto the computer, like talking into the microphone. We have a smoother process than this, but this is just me and my husband. We're still a little, listen, yesterday, because my kids are doing remote learning, I was just telling your crew before we started that I literally, my kids have just kind of started their schooling again, literally walked behind him in a conference call of 40 kids in my bra, because I walk around in my bra around the house a lot. And he just set up, he was like just kind of setting up these big Zoom classes anywhere. He's just like, I'll pick a location, but I had no idea. Anyways, this is how we're all living right now. It's great.
But the thing is, if not for this sort of new and will be, it's not even the new normal anymore. It's like the old normal, because we're deep in it right now. We're going to be in it for a while, as you said. But in a way, strangely, that's what adds to, I think, the character of a lot of television we're seeing now, is that because it is much more kind of behind that fourth wall, that you're seeing things that you didn't get a chance to see before. So now I would never see in your guest room if not for this.
It's true. And normal, this angle is very new for us, because usually we have the camera angled toward the thermostat in the room, but we thought we would give you a treat today and angle it toward the window. But you can see the light panels in the window. So it's not so mysterious, but I do think I agree with you. I think it's an opportunity to innovate. We've certainly figured out, along the way, we've figured out what elements of our former process we can do away with. We're not going to have an audience. Frankly, we're not going to have an audience for, I don't know how long, a year. Who's going to who's going to join a studio audience to watch a free taping of a show? I feel like theater will come back and people will sign up for that because that's, that's like art and you buy a ticket and it's a whole thing. But a free taping of a show that you can watch on TV, it doesn't feel vital, So we're now trying to explore ways that we can shoot the show the morning of the day that it airs, which is how we would normally do. So we're trying to advance our process as we go. And each thing we try, we learn another trick. Our producers are learning ways to make things more visual so they're not as flat as they are right now. And as I sit before you in this room, we're trying to see it as an opportunity to refine our processes and figure out what it is that we truly love and we want to keep and what we can do away with.
So among the things that you will keep for a while, will it be your family being your production crew? And what has that experience been like?
Oh, my children do not want to help anymore. They are, okay, I have a 10-year-old, I have a 12-year-old, and I have a 14-year-old, and she is very good. My 14-year-old is very good at holding this like light bounce. It's like a piece of kind of bendy foil that if you put it just so, it catches the sunlight and it bounces this really nice light. It's very flattering. And she's very good at it because it's like a little project. She kind of angles the beam just so, and it hits me and it's really great. But when she gets bored of it, and it's boring for her because she does not want to watch me do anything. She just wants me to make breakfast and walk away. So when she's working for our family business, you can see in some shots that the light is on my face. It looks great. And then it just drops away. It just falls because she's tired and she sits down. She's just like, I don't like this show. What are you doing? This is so embarrassing. You're so embarrassing. So, it has, they're very good at it when they want to do stuff. And when they are not in the mood, it's very evident.
Okay. Sounds like you might need to try some bribery with the work crew. Maybe that'll help. I'm not sure.
I know.
Yeah.
Very targeted bribery. Yeah.
Yes. Just something to consider. But as you mentioned, you didn't want to be off air for too long because you didn't want to leave the public consciousness. But the other part of that is that this is a really exciting, I hate using that word because it's also traumatizing, but it's an exciting and traumatizing time to be, a late night host, and you have plenty of content. I saw your recent comments about the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And even before that, you had a whole campaign involving the United States Postal Service. So as you're in this time and trying to balance how you're coping with the pandemic and everything that's happening, does it also for you feel like a time where you need to be in the mix of things and need to be, keeping people informed, a little bit of infotainment, if you will?
Well, that's for sure a part of it, because I think that mostly people on the, people who work for Full Frontal, we're obviously all super driven and passionate about these issues. So it would be like, we'd probably in some form or another be doing this show alone in our homes if it wasn't for the fact that we could kind of gather and make content like this. So also we want to be able to be commenting on it, and we want to be able to stake, to plant a flag in it. And, one of the driving forces, I think, behind the show and what really feeds all of us is that the show, and I really, when I'm personally performing the show, it represents the work of really 65 incredible people. And we all want to say our piece. Like this is a crazy time. And I feel like so much of this form of entertainment is just really planting a flag in what's right and what's wrong and calling things out and being our honest selves and being upset when our BG dies and, making these statements. It's very important to all of us, to a person. So I wouldn't want to miss that, even though the world is truly terrible right now. truly, what would we be doing? If we weren't doing this, we'd all be just shrieking at our radios or our television sets. So we might as well just like shriek collectively and make a TV show with it.
I know you could list probably 500 things, but I'll ask you to keep them to a couple, and I'll say we only have a couple minutes left because I know your answer could probably go for another 20 minutes. Okay. What concerns you the most about this upcoming election?
Oh, so many things. I'm very concerned about, I'll say this, I want it so badly to be a landslide. I want so badly for this to be a very definitive victory for Joe Biden so that we do not have to dwell the day after or the night of in a state of uncertainty where there's a contested election or we're waiting for mail-in ballots to be counted properly so that we can know. I want there to be no subtlety whatsoever. This cannot be a squeaker. That is the thing that I'm most worried about. I'm most worried about the outcome of the election, very clearly. And I'm second most worried about, and it's a pretty close second, about the period after the election until the inauguration. And I just am so hopeful that that will go smoothly. And I'm obviously super worried. As you asked the question, my whole body kind of like I felt my shoulders just go, my whole body just compacted like I just got, but I'm worried. I think we should all be worried. Sorry.
Especially in light of the president's recent comments about not wanting to leave peacefully. I think that we have every right to be concerned. Yes, exactly. Well, look, for those out there, just so you know, Programming Alert, you can catch Full Frontal with Samantha Bee every Wednesday night, 10:30 on TBS. Samantha, thank you. And please keep bringing the truth in a way that, whether we like it or not, we have to accept it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Here is Yoni Applebaum, a senior editor at The Atlantic.
Is this the beginning of the end of American racism? That's the central question posed in a recent Atlantic article written by our next guest. It's my pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague, Atlantic contributor and the director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research, Dr. Ibram Kendi. Ibram, in that article, you single out an unlikely hero for praise. You say that perhaps no American president has convinced more Americans of the reality of racism than Donald Trump. Could you expand on that a little and say why you would credit Donald Trump like that?
Well, first, when you look at the polling data, you see this massive increase in the number of Americans who are recognizing racism as a problem during the political career of Donald Trump. So you saw this massive jump between 2015 and 2016, and another significant jump from 2016 to today. And I think what is fascinating about Trump is not only has he supported racist policies like locking up Latinx children in cages, not only has he expressed racist ideas, describing nations in Africa and even Latin America as S-holes, but he's also denied that he was being racist. And that denial of his own racism, sort of in conversation with the racism itself, has really put up a mirror to the denial that everyday Americans have. So when they themselves say, I'm not racist, they also are knowing that Donald Trump is saying, I'm not racist.
Now, you've looked at how Americans think about race, looking at polling questions, one that you call an anti-racist index, where pollsters ask the American public, do you think that Black Americans are primarily disadvantaged, but because of racism and discrimination. And the way that Americans have answered that question over time has evolved, and perhaps never more rapidly than the last few years. Why do you think that's changing?
I mean, I think in addition to the persisting denials of Donald Trump, combined with what people view as his naked sort of racism, I think we're in the midst of a time where you have all sorts of writers, from journalists to scholars, who are directly challenging and exposing racism. You have organizations who are doing so. You have a Black Lives Matter movement that's really making people aware of racism, and that are saying collectively that the problem isn't people of color when there's racial disparities and inequities. The problem is racism.
Now, this is sort of an odd case for optimism about this moment. Many Americans can see the protests in the streets, are perhaps newly aware of some of the problems, from police violence to discrimination in the workplace. And it feels, I think, to many Americans like an extremely pessimistic moment, a moment when harsh realities have been thrown into the spotlight. You're suggesting here instead that the very recognition of those problems represents progress. But you also give us a warning that we may be tempted to think that if Donald Trump has called our attention to these problems, that simply removing Donald Trump from office will cure them.
Exactly, and if we truly do believe, if as many Americans seem to believe, that racism is embodied in Donald Trump, not embodied in the policies of our communities and institutions that are leading to disparities, but if people believe that racism is embodied in Donald Trump, then people believe that once they rid the White House of Donald Trump, in their mind, they're imagining that they've rid the country of racism. So yet again, they will declare a post-racial society, and yet again, they will in fact be living in a fantasy land where indeed racism is continuing to advance. And then we would be laying the groundwork for the reemergence of another Donald Trump.
You know, the president lately has been labeling what he calls critical race theory unpatriotic. He's suggesting that scholars who do the work that frankly, that you do, are giving Americans a narrative of America as a flawed and perhaps irredeemable country. What would you say to the president and to others who suggest that the history you write is unpatriotic?
Well, I would first and foremost say that the job of the historian is not to be concerned about whether presidents or politicians or even the American people consider truth-telling to be patriotic or not. The job of the historian is to tell the truth. The job of the historian is to present the evidence. And if that evidence causes the American people to love their country and feel great about their country, or hate their country, or think their country is irredeemable, then that's up to the people. It's our job to present the evidence. And it seems as if Donald Trump wants a history that not grounded in truth, but that compels Americans to love their country. And to me, that should not be the basis of our educational system. Our educational system, certainly our history, should be based on what actually happened or what is actually happening.
So if Americans now see their country more clearly, if they have a better understanding of that history, and it's leading them to take the problem of racism and its persistence more seriously, is there a path forward? How can Americans, ordinary Americans, take that understanding of the past and translate it into a better future?
Well, I mean, if Americans look out at the racial disparities in our country and recognize that they are the result of past and even lingering racist policies, and those policies and structures and systems become the problem, then the path forward becomes pretty plain. We need to rid the country of those racist policies, structures, and systems, and replace them with more anti-racist policies and structures and systems. In other words, it's not enough to just be aware. We must then take action so that we can transform this country.
You're using two words here, racist and anti-racist, as a set of oppositional extremes. I can be moral, immoral, or amoral. But you've written that there is no middle ground between being racist and anti-racist. Why do you think that's so?
So when it comes to race, there's racial equality and there's racial inequality. There's no in between. There's racial hierarchy and there's racial notions of racial equality. There's no in between hierarchy and equality. There's racial equity and there's racial inequity. There's racial justice and there's racial injustice. And when we look at our ideas, they're either connoting that certain racial groups are better or worse than others, or they're connoting that the racial groups are equals. When we look at our policies, they're either leading to equity between racial groups or inequity between racial groups. If it was up to me, there would be 6 ways of understanding this. But at the end of the day, I can't find anything between equity and inequity. And those who are championing notions of racial equality and pushing for equity in our society are being anti-racist. And those who are championing racial hierarchy and pushing policies that are maintaining racial inequity are being racist.
So if you take the energy that the anti-racist movement has found in 2020 and you map it forward, it may carry through the fall election, but you're suggesting it's going to have to carry far beyond that to start to achieve the kind of anti-racist society you'd like to see Americans build. What kind of advice do you have for ordinary people, people who aren't government officials? They may not be policymakers, but they'd like to build a better and more equitable country?
Sure. I think everyday people need to, and that's even someone like me, I'm not a government official, but what we need to be doing is discerning between that policymaker who is promoting a policy that will reduce racial inequity and who's promoting a policy that can eliminate racial inequity. And we need to be supporting those policymakers and those policies that have the potential to eliminate racial inequity, in the way that abolitionists some time ago were advocating for immediate emancipation of all people enslaved. We need to be demanding immediate equality. And there are policies that are out there that can eliminate poverty, and certainly Black and brown disproportionate poverty. There are policies out there that could presumably eliminate the growing racial wealth gap, eliminate the ability to voter suppress, eliminate the police violence. And that's how we need to be thinking, because that's how we can transform this country. If we start with the question, what can eliminate racial inequity, then we'll get answers.
So for Americans, it can be a matter of demanding better policies from their policymakers. Are there things that they can do at an interpersonal level as well, or is this mostly about pushing for government reform?
I think at an interpersonal level, each and every one of us need to make sure that we are striving to be anti-racist, meaning we are seeing the racial groups as equals, which then allows us to protect ourselves from those who are trafficking ideas that are dividing us, that are saying that certain things are wrong with Black people or Native people, and that those people are animals, and I'll protect you from those animals. And, we need to be recognizing that those types of racist ideas deflect us from what the true problem is, and what truly is dividing us, and what's truly preventing us as an American community from coming together, what's preventing us as a human community, from coming together. Because what's going to bring people together is equality, is equity, is justice, and that's where we need to be focused.
What are you most worried about at this moment?
I'm most worried that the critical mass of aware people will think that that is enough, that it's enough to recognize that racism is a serious problem, and that many of those folks will not be willing to support the big solutions that can eliminate racism, and they will thereby only support gradual policies that will gradually reduce some forms of inequity. But then, as a result, when the politics of this country change and new policies are put in place, those sort of successes from those gradual declines will be eradicated. And then we'll be back to square one.
Let me flip that around. What gives you the most hope right now?
Oh, the resistance. People demonstrating last night when they heard that Breonna Taylor wasn't going to receive justice. People demonstrating today, people outraged when they see racism, in full view. And people thinking about how can they transform power, in policy. Resistance always gives me hope.
Thank you, Dr. Kendi, for talking with us today.
Thank you, Yoni.
The Atlantic Festival is brought to you through the generous support of Facebook, Genentech, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Walton Family Foundation, Allstate, Eli Lilly and Company, U.S. Bank, AARP, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ExxonMobil, John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Nestle Waters North America, and PayPal. And now, a session produced by our underwriter, the Walton Family Foundation.
Hi, I'm Carol Stern, Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation. It's time to listen to our younger generation, millennials and Gen Z. It's time because the social change our world needs is far too big to carry by one generation. The Walton Family Foundation is, at its core, a family-led foundation committed to increasing access to opportunity for people and for communities. And multi-generational change is at the heart of what we do. We are inspired by our founders, Sam and Helen Walton, and today our work is led by their children, their grandchildren, and their spouses. We know we are stronger when experienced leaders learn from young leaders who bring fresh and bold thinking that's necessary to solve big problems. As the millennial and Gen Z generations deal with complex and big challenges, the most important thing we can do is to give young leaders access to the opportunity to succeed, access to a high-quality education, and access to a healthier and more sustainable environment. But what does success look like to them? How do they define the American dream? What do they feel are the biggest obstacles to opportunity in the future? The Walton Family Foundation is working with Kristen Soltis Anderson, co-founder of Echelon Insights, to answer these questions and more. Kristen is the author of The Selfie Vote and is known as one of the most foremost experts on the millennial generation. At the Walton Family Foundation, we are inspired by the perspectives of all generations. Powerful change happens when we listen to each other. And today, we are so excited to share with you what we are learning from this research.
Thank you, Carol. I'm Kristen Soltis Anderson, co-founder of Echelon Insights, and it's been an honor to participate in this research, partnering with the Walton Family Foundation to better understand what young Americans think about opportunity and their future. It's easy to imagine that for many, they think that the next generation will be worse off, that things are not going to be as good for the millennial generation or Generation Z. Just consider the headlines that have dominated their young lives, from foreign conflict to financial crises, now a global pandemic. It's amazing when you actually take a look at the data and see that while most Americans overall think that the next generation will be worse off, millennials and Generation Z take a different view. They've faced hardships, they've faced hurdles. But overall, in our research, only 13% of Generation Z and millennials think they're likely to be worse off than their parents were. In particular, we find significant majorities of young Black, Latinx, and Asian Americans say that they believe they will be better off than their parents were. Now, when we take a look at the challenges they face, those are clear and prominent. Just because young Americans feel pretty optimistic about their own prospects doesn't mean that they've had it easy, and doesn't mean there aren't obstacles standing in their way. In our research, 43% of young Americans say that higher education is too expensive or hard for them to access. Another 40% say it's an extremely or very big problem for them because that they don't have access to healthcare. For 35%, racial inequality is an issue, but that goes all the way up to 60% when you're specifically talking to young Black Americans. But even with all of these hurdles that young people say are standing in their way, we still find 2/3 of millennials and Generation Z believe that they will achieve the American dream. But how are they defining the American dream anyways? What does that mean to them? Is it a relevant term? In our research, we studied the views of 2,000 millennials and 2,000 Gen Z Americans, and then followed it up with interviews in depth with over 100 respondents, trying to understand better in their own words how they think about things like success and opportunity. One of the exercises we did in our research was to ask them to upload an image that defines for them what the American dream means. And for some, they chose that cliche of a white picket fence. Here, respondent Jonathan D. says, "It reminds me of what I would see in textbooks as a kid, and really my first time hearing the phrase. I definitely think the American dream has changed since the time period that this image represents, but this is still what I first think of. Husband and wife, white picket fence, car, 2.5 kids, maybe a dog." But there's also an acknowledgement from so many that even if this is the image that first comes to mind, it's not what the American dream means for them. As Samantha F. put it in our research, "I don't think I envision the American dream in the stereotypical light of white picket fence, 4-person family, financial success type of way. I think I view it more as America serving, as an opportunity for people to better their lives in a society where people are equal and have the same access to resources." In our survey, when we asked young people to define what a better life might mean, to better their lives would require freedom and financial stability. Those were our top 2 responses. And sure enough, we do find that some millennials and Gen Z, when they think of something like the American dream, they think of the nice car, the nice house, having money. But more often in our research, we find the word opportunity coming to the forefront. As respondent Nayla P. put it, "I think of everyone having the same opportunities in life regardless of race," uploading an image that says, "We are one." This idea of opportunity being core to what people believe is going to enable their ability to be successful in life, that to them is the American dream, was resonant throughout our research. So what will it take to unlock opportunity and a better life for the next generation? There are 2 pretty key themes that emerged through our research. The first is the importance of the environment. For all of the optimism that we have found throughout this research, the environment is the one thing that millennials and Generation Z do worry is going to be worse for them over the long haul, worse than what their parents had. But we also find that it's crucial to them for unlocking opportunity. 74% in our research said the environment in their community is very or extremely important when it comes to having opportunity. Another critical piece of the puzzle is education. 72% say that the public schools in their community are extremely or very important to unlocking opportunity as well. That education is so critical to making sure that young people can build the lives that they want for themselves. And in order to do so, they say in our survey that they want to see schools do more at teaching career and life skills, that's what would really set them up for success in the future. So ultimately, our research finds that the new American dream is really just opportunity, the opportunity to choose your path and to have doors open to you along the way. Thank you again to the Walton Family Foundation for sponsoring this research and for helping shine a light on what Generation Z and the millennial generation think about their own futures.
And now, a special message and performance from the cast of the Broadway show, Ain't Too Proud.
Hello, Atlantic Festival. I'm Nick Walker.
And I'm Jawan M. Jackson, and I'm here in New York City with some of my castmates from the Broadway show, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. And oh, how we wish we can be there with you.
As many of you know, the Temptations were heavily influenced by the 1960s civil rights movement. Songs like Ball of Confusion, Cloud 9, Papa Was a Rolling Stone. These are all songs that reflected the times they lived in. And that same spirit is alive today with the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, we are proud to be part of a Broadway show that recognizes the impact the past had on the fight for racial equality today.
And you're hearing this news first. Next month, we are joined by our good friend, Whoopi Goldberg, and the founding member of the Temptations, Otis Williams, along with our Tony-nominated book writer, Dominique Morso, for a very, very important conversation about these important topics. Visit ain'ttooproudmusical.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more on this event, being presented in partnership with American Express.
And now for a special treat. Watch us as we get back in the groove for our Broadway show. Enjoy.
I know you wanna leave me, but I refuse to let you go. If I have to beg and plead for your sympathy, I don't mind, 'cause you mean that much to me. Ain't too proud to beg, 'cause you know it. Please don't leave me, girl. You go. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. You go. Now I heard a cry, man, it's half a man. No sense of pride, but if I have to cry to keep you, I don't mind weeping. If it keeps you by my side, ain't too proud to beg, sweet darling. Please don't leave me, don't you go. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl, don't you go. Now I got a love so deep in the pit of my heart, and each day it grows more and more. I'm not ashamed to come and plead to you, baby. If pleading keeps you from walking out that door, ain't too proud to beg, sweet darling. Please don't leave me, don't you go. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. You go.
Here is Atlantic senior editor Lauren Williams.
What does it mean to be American? Immigrants are an important part of the American story, and without them, this country would have missed out not only on key contributions in technology, business, and science, but also on the many cultural treasures that enrich our lives in so many ways. I'm joined by someone who understands the immigrant story firsthand. She's a best-selling author, the host of Top Chef, and her new series on Hulu, Taste the Nation, tackles these issues head-on. Padma, Lakshmi, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. It's nice to speak with you.
So I just want to jump right in. We don't have that much time, but can you initially just talk about your work with the American Civil Liberties Union and how that basically led to the creation of your series, Taste the Nation?
Sure. I began getting involved with the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union, just after the election, and I started getting deeper and deeper into my work with them. I work with them on immigrant issues as well as women's rights issues, and, you know, sadly, a huge icon and friend of mine died last week, and Justice Ginsburg actually started the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU, and the work that we do at the ACLU is largely because of her in the women's rights sector and all that she paved for us. So I have to shout her out. But, I just started getting more and more involved. I started learning about all the stories with the child separation. I was separated from my parents for 2 years, but I was in a loving home with my grandparents. And it still had a very long-lasting effect on me in a number of ways. So I think when I was hearing about all of that child separation and all the atrocities that we've all heard about at the border, it moved something in me in a very visceral way. I'm a mother now, but you don't have to be a parent to feel horrified by what's going on. And so that's how my work started. I became close to some human rights attorneys at the ACLU, specifically someone named Lee Gallant, who is probably the country's foremost specialist on immigrant law. And he gave me quite an education. And, I know that I am where I am today because of a twist of fate, and I could easily have been one of those many children in another universe. And so I don't know how to explain it. It just galvanized something in me. And so we had a town hall a few years ago in Miami, the first town hall to really teach people how to lawfully protest. And I gave a keynote address there at that town hall. And I was really nervous because everyone else who was speaking was a human rights attorney, and I'm, of course, not that. So, but, I just used my own story as a jumping off point, and my work got deeper and deeper, and I started thinking about these people. And at the time I was looking for another project to do, and I was working on a cookbook about immigrant food. And then separately with my producing partner, we were also wanting to do a show on immigration. And then we basically merged the two projects into one.
Awesome. I'm so struck by the socio-political commentary in the episodes. In one scene, there's, a chef making burritos, and you get into talking about how colonization affected Mexican cuisine, in particular, the shift from the maize tortilla to the flour tortilla. And it was masterful how that sort of translation was done. So how do you balance the tension on the show between these like heavy, ugly historical facts and the beauty of sharing food?
I balance it, like every immigrant has balanced their life, really. I mean, it's hard to always be talking about such serious things. I feel that way even on my social media. I feel like I'm always screaming from the rooftops about something or other, and all I want to do is put a recipe up, but these are the times we live in. I think that all our lives are really complex, and I think in the same 1 hour of our lives, we can be crying and then we can be laughing, or we can be crying with tears of joy because we're reunited with our family. And so I think that's what life is. And I was interested in doing a documentary that looked at the emotional ramifications of food and the history of our people through food. And, I've spent my life using food as a medium to express myself for the last 20 years. And that is the language that people are used to me speaking. And so I felt that it would be a good vehicle. I mean, I think you guys said it best. The food is kind of a Trojan horse, right? To get me in to these homes and restaurants and food trucks and dance schools and car washes, wherever we're going on any given episode. And I didn't want to do another program that was superficial or something that had, kind of lifestyle attached to its category. I just wasn't interested in that intellectually. I think those programs are great. I enjoy them immensely myself. I just wanted to do something. I wanted to do a show that I wanted to watch. And I don't have a lot of time to watch TV, even if it's my profession. So, Yeah,
no, I get it. I'd like to dig a bit into your process. So can you walk us through sort of the information gathering and the research that goes into constructing each episode? You and I had talked briefly about how, you're walking into these people's homes, and you really have to gain their trust. So just how, on the front end, how do you decide which cultures you're going to spotlight? And then also, how do you go about that holistically and
Sure.
sensitively?
Well, in very broad strokes, first we created a list. Me and my producing partner created a list of communities I was interested in, communities he was interested in. I wanted to show America in all its diversity, and not only its diversity of people and ethnicities, but also diversity of land, which is why you have Hawaii, lush Hawaii, and the desert of Arizona, and the backwaters of Charleston. I wanted to show the visual landscape, the landscape of America. And so the visual language is very specific on Taste the Nation. It seeks to be at once very expansive and encompassing of our great nation, as people say, and also at the same time, very, very intimate and very just quiet. I think we have such short attention spans. We seems like we don't have time for anything more than a meme or, a Twitter feed, a Twitter post or something. And I just wanted to do something quiet. I wanted to get to know these people because it was my belief that if I could just show people that all these immigrant communities that we walk past and make judgments about are just as human as anybody else, then I had a chance. I think a lot of the rhetoric that has pushed us to the far corners of the spectrum, either on the right or on the left, have been manipulated because of political gain. And that was not my experience on the ground as an immigrant. It was not my experience of other immigrant communities who I grew up with. And so for me, the most important thing was to give these communities a platform and allow them to speak for themselves. So many people were speaking about immigrants who, were in Washington, like Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and Trump. And I wanted to give a counterpoint to that. But I wanted to do it hopefully with kindness and compassion and not with the same belligerent aggressiveness that I was hearing all these immigrant communities being vilified, literally. And that offended me. And so the show is actually not created for people who think like me. The show is created for, people who are in red states who don't feel immigration is a good thing. And it's hopefully reconnecting them to the fact that, unless you're part of the Cherokee Nation, all of us are immigrants, even if we're a product of forced migration, as in the Gullah community with Western Africa.
Yeah. One thread I did notice throughout the show is food as a way to preserve culture. To your point, we see it with the Gullah Geechee people of South Carolina, and we also see it when you're talking with Madar Jaffrey about trying to pass Indian food down to your daughter, Krishna. So can you talk about the role food plays in passing down these traditions and sort of what you learned talking to these folks from different cultures?
I think food is one of the biggest way that people, not just immigrants, but any community, passes culture down to the next generation. You think about our culture, every ritual and ceremony is conducted with food, whether it's a marriage, a funeral, a birth, a date, a dinner date, a power lunch, a power breakfast, all of it. We use food as an instrument to court others, to nurture our loved ones, to communicate a lot. And, I think that is a good way in because it's non-threatening. Even Ted Cruz likes tacos.
Was there a time where you had like an outline for an episode and you went in thinking it was going to turn out one way and it didn't at all? Like anything that surprised you in the field while you were conducting these interviews? What were some things that surprised you?
What surprised me was the immense food knowledge that all of these average people have who are not really average once you get to know them. And I'm of the firm belief that everybody has a compelling story if you're just willing to listen. I had an incredible day in the Arizona desert on the reservation. I'd never been to a reservation before. Went to the San Carlos Reservation and talked to Navajo and Apache people and spent the day with Twyla Casador, who is this amazing seed carrier. And the amount of breadth of knowledge that she has about the flora and fauna of that region of the country. And it's all oral, so she's actually taking the time to catalog it all and share her information with other indigenous tribes to sort of create a body of information that would really help all Americans, because a lot of the practices of indigenous people, even with the fires just now on the West Coast, the indigenous community has a practice of purposefully burning certain forests or certain amount of trees every year to prevent what's going on. And we've just lost that. It was outlawed decades ago. And so all of these practices, all of the practices that they have regarding, how to live off the land but love the land was hugely informative to me. And the Gullah people also taught me a lot. I became close to BJ Dennis, who is a chef in Charleston, several years ago when I went there to film Top Chef. And I just really had an affinity for the culture, and I just got to know people there, and I knew that I wanted to go back there, and I was really happy. That episode, the El Paso episode, and the Indigenous episode, I knew that I wanted to do even before I sold the show. And those were very important to me because we never talk about African American food as an immigrant food culture, but it is. It's just forced migration. And, what people don't understand is that those West African enslaved people who came here were brought here because they were sought out for their skills, their expertise, their knowledge of cultivation and agriculture. And they're hundreds of years of tradition. They didn't walk onto American soil not knowing anything. They brought so many things that we think of as quintessentially American, like the banjo. That was brought by enslaved people. Bene seeds, which are sesame seeds, all these things, beans. I mean, you look at red rice in the South, you can't help but see the ancestry to Nigerian jollof rice. And I think that's all interesting. And I didn't learn any of that in high school. And I'm a product, or college, but I'm a product of the American educational system. And I should have learned that, because that can be a real point of pride, not only for the African American community, but for all Americans. There's so many ugly things that have happened in our past. And if somebody lifts themselves up and their family and removes themselves from their home, their land, their culture, and goes somewhere else, it's usually because they have no choice. It's usually because that is the better choice. So a lot of these people have come here through some trauma or, some kind of event or circumstance in their life that they're, coming here for. And so even though a lot of our history is painful, I believe that there is merit in looking it squarely in the eye, because if we don't, then we'll always be ignorant, we'll always be in the dark, and we'll always have the same presumptions about each other. And that is what I really wanted to look at. I wanted to document. I wanted to show. It's obviously an editorial show. It is not a journalistic show. It is my point of view, clearly. But I just, I found these, I grew up amongst these people. I grew up in a very blue collar, middle or lower enclave in Southern California in high school. But before that, I was in the city, and I lived in Queens, so in New York. So these are the friends of my parents. These are the people that I grew up with, and they're just like me. And I don't think a lot of people associate me with that kind of immigrant community because, I'm on a red carpet or whatever. But actually, they're no different from you and I just wanted to show them in all of their complexity.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Padma. Thank you for being with us tonight. It's been a great pleasure having you with us.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Bye.
Bye.
The Atlantic Festival is brought to you through the generous support of Facebook, Genentech, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Walton Family Foundation, Allstate, Eli Lilly and Company, U.S. Bank, AARP, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ExxonMobil, John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Nestle Waters North America, and PayPal. Here is the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey
Our next guest needs no introduction, so I'm not going to introduce him. He's Bob Woodward. Everyone knows who Bob Woodward is, and he wrote, of course, this new best-selling, #1 best-selling book. And Bob, welcome. Welcome to the Atlantic Festival. Thanks for coming on. Hey, Bob, I have a lot of questions, and we have a short period of time. I want to ask you something about something the president just said in response to a question. He said, we're going to have to see what happens. And he was responding to a question about whether he'd commit to a peaceful transfer of power. I wonder, you're one of the world's leading Trumpologists at this point. I'm wondering if that struck you as a new level of tension or a new level of norm breaking on the part of this president.
Well, first of all, I tend to not worry about his norm breaking because he was elected to break norms. And I think the accusation, he's breaking norms, is a little, it doesn't reflect an understanding of why he was elected in 2016. People love the lack of decorum. They don't like it when people like you and me in the media seem self-satisfied and smug. But here, as best I can tell.
But this is not an issue of decorum. He's saying that this is not just mere decorum or norm breaking. He's saying that maybe there will be violence if I don't like the results of what happens in November.
Yes, I agree, and I think we're in store for a quadruple train wreck almost no matter what happens. He has set the table in a very dramatic way, saying, we can't count these votes. We're not going to be able to count the votes. We're not going to be able to trust what comes, and particularly if he loses. So I don't know how we right the ship on this. I am horrified, and I think the stance he has taken reflects such a dangerous approach to the job of being president. He's supposed to protect the people. He's supposed to protect our institutions and our laws. He's supposed to tell the truth. He is supposed to be, as I quote General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, in the first couple of years of Trump's presidency, saying that Trump has no moral compass. I think he has no moral compass. I think, as I quote Dr. Fauci, saying Trump is obsessed with one thing, and that is being reelected. And this is an extraordinary time, and I hope you and all the people at the Atlantic and all of us at the Washington Post and every media organization are going to keep reporting this story about Trump and what's going to happen in the next 7 weeks.
Stay on this for a minute. The very obvious question to you is, has Trump gone significantly farther than Richard Nixon ever went? I love hearing you on this subject. I could listen to you all day on it, but spend a couple of minutes on Nixon v. Trump.
Well, but as you know, and for a straight reporter, you need to look at each presidency as it is, and the comparison is fun, and historians are going to have a field day. Nixon was clearly a criminal. Criminal evidence has not been presented about Trump at this point. Some people interpret the record as that. But think about it. I have to go back to this. The first interview I did with him for this book was December 5th of last year. So it's 10 months ago. Go into the Oval Office, put down my tape recorder on the Resolute desk and say, this is on the record. I'm going to record everything. I hope to talk to you many, many times. I didn't think it would be 19, frankly. 9 hours, but I'm glad it was. And it's going to come out, all of this before the election. And he said, fine. On page 49 of that transcript, I asked him the obvious question, what do you think the job of the president is? And he said, well, the job is to protect the people. He has failed in a way that is a catastrophe to protect the people. I think he fully understands the powers that he has as president, but the microphone, the bully pulpit, in releasing audios on this, the microphone is really a microscope, and we see into his attitudes. I was able to ask him about all of the issues of the day. I was able to press him. If you've read this, Jeff, you're one of the top Trump watchers. Do you have any idea why he would let me keep pressing him on issues? Because I know from his key staff people, when he makes a decision or says something, he will not let people really pressure him. And I did. Why did he allow that? Do you know?
I do know, but I'm the interviewer now, Bob. But I will answer you. I do know. You're a Washington monument. No, you're a Washington monument. He respects fame. He doesn't actually know what you've done. He's never read anything you've written, but he knows that you're important and knows that you're famous. So he has respect. Fame knows fame in a kind of way. And so I actually think that's part of it. He also, at some part of his brain understood that you know a lot of presidents. And so there's probably some vague curiosity. But again, that's only very vague because he doesn't really have curiosity about other people. But it's an interesting look. It is one of the questions that people ask why he would cooperate with you. I think one of the answers about why he cooperated with you is embedded in the book, and it has to do with Jared Kushner. And I wanted to ask you something about that. There's a lot of strange and wondrous things in this book about this White House. One of the strangest passages and one of the most revealing passages in the whole book concerns your conversation with Jared Kushner, in which he gave you sort of a quasi-literary guide to understanding Donald Trump. And he mentioned Alice in Wonderland, obviously. But the one I wanted to ask you about, because this is so bizarre, Jared Kushner talked about Scott Adams, the Dilbert cartoonist who's pro-Trump. And Scott Adams, in his book, Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter, talks about intentional wrongness persuasion. And I thought at that point in the book, somewhere around the 300, I forgot exactly where, 300 pages or so in, I thought, okay, now Bob is really getting down to something. Talk about intentional wrongness persuasion and Jared Kushner's understanding of this idea.
Yes, the way Kushner explains it, I'm glad you asked because I think it's central and fascinating. Kushner's explanation, which I quote him in the book saying, is the controversy elevates message. Namely, if you have a controversy that is more or less on your side, it's going to help you. And the example he cites is the economy, where Trump comes out and says it's the best economy in the world. And then there's a dispute and all the fact checkers come along and say, no, in the 1950s it was better, or the Roman Empire or something like that. And Kushner says that controversy, that dispute, the average person out there, Biden supporter, Trump supporter, not following all the news, but sees this and then says, well, the economy's pretty good, and whether it's the best in the world does not really affect their lives. What does affect their lives at this point before the virus is that it's basically a good economy. And if you think about it, it's a clever strategy. Get into these fights, which Kushner talks about, and if they are on favorable ground, it will help Trump because the the Democrats and the media will come in and dispute things in a very technical, the fact-checking mentality, which is important. It's got to be done. But if it's on a broad issue like the economy, or as we are now facing the Supreme Court issue, and Trump is just loves this because we're not talking about the virus. Oh, by the way, 1,000 people died today. Part of this controversy elevates message is controversy kind of nullifies something that's been going on for months, namely, 200,000 people dead in this country. If a year ago I said to you, we're going to face something like that in the year 2020, you would think I was on some real heavy drug. And that's what's happened. It's gone on month after month. And now we can have a discussion about the Supreme Court. And Trump thinks, and I think he may be right, this is favorable ground for him, where the virus is not a good subject to have a debate or discussion about.
You've written a lot of books about Washington, and you've met some pretty cynical people. This passage, this 3 or 4 page passage, is among the most cynical things, not you, but Jared Kushner, being more cynical than I think I've ever seen anyone in Washington be. Am I wrong? Or am I putting them in a separate category when they're just on a continuum?
Well, let's see. The Gordon Liddy, who ran the Watergate burglary team, was pretty cynical about things. He thought if he could shred the $100 bills in his pocket, they never would find out who financed Watergate. So there's a lot of cynicism.
So is Jared Kushner just a Harvard version? Is Jared Kushner just some Harvard version of G. Gordon Liddy then?
Let's not tag it to Harvard. It's Kushner. Remember, and I make this point in the book, that he's de facto chief of staff. We are now on the 4th chief of staff that Trump has had. Kushner has been a constant. I report he sees the president every day. He is married to Ivanka. They are both senior advisors. And this is, after Trump, the most powerful position in the government, don't you think? Does anyone have any more power than Kushner? Not in my reporting.
Right. Well, and he can't be fired, necessarily.
Well, he could be fired. I mean, he could go back to
It's hard to fire your son-in-law.
Well, Trump does some pretty unimaginable things. And
Could I add, stay on that for a minute?
Okay.
Go on. No, stay on the pretty unimaginable things. It just really, it struck me as a... I want to ask you this point blank, the thing that everybody talks about, which is, you've had a lot of exposure to him. Do you think he's mentally unstable?
Well, see, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't make that judgment.
But you're a human being who's met a lot of people.
No. But you see, that's what I think we've got to get out of trying to play psychiatrist, or in our business, moralist, or political opportunist, or, making political judgments, making moral judgments about people who are Trump supporters. They're columnists who write for your publication and the Washington Post, and they say there's only one way to look at this. Any decent person will look at it this way. I don't think that way. I think it is a giant mistake, and it feeds this notion of elitism in the media. And what we need, I know Trump supporters who are financial advisors, business people, people who are workers, military people, law enforcement people, and if they accost me or say, they like Trump or something like that, I give them a free copy of the book and I say, read it. You don't have to agree with me. I can understand that people are not going to agree with me. And it is very important to give people that opportunity, and they're going to take it or they're not going to take it. But I think for people who do work like us, like your great piece about Trump and the military and things he said that people knew about. I knew some of it, quite frankly. I did not have it firsthand in a way I could use it, but I heard those stories about what Trump said at the gravesite of John Kelly's son, and I heard it from two senior cabinet officers that they heard that from Kelly. I never was able to get it firsthand, but Trump has he will just say anything about anyone. And in the case of your story, he realizes how damaging it is, so he denies it, and people say they never heard him say it, and so forth. Look, he calls people suckers and losers all the time. He labels people in a way that the idea, Rex Tillerson is Secretary of State. Lots of people are critical of him. I report that people in the State Department didn't like the way he did his job. But for Trump to hire that man out of retirement and give him the #1 cabinet post in the government and then turn on him and say publicly he's dumb as a rock, unimaginable. I'm sure you've had people who've left the Atlantic and you may have had some negative feelings about them, but would you ever say anything that is equivalent? It reflects the failure and the ability of Trump to build a team, to listen to other people, to accept the political and moral responsibility of being president of the United States, and the treatment of the military. I have some support in my book about what he said about generals, and he tries to be cute, and he says, well, I'm not really saying the generals are stupid, but anyone who said that is stupid. So we have a one-man band presidency. He does what he wants. When you get into this, as you know, you have to ask the question, is this a fundamental attitude he has? And does he really think the military or lots of people who died in Vietnam and other battles are suckers and losers? I don't know. I can't, he's not on the, but fully conceivable. He would say this about anybody if it comes into his mind. And this is the problem, and this is what drove people like Mattis and Tillerson and head of intelligence, Dan Coates, crazy, because there would be no orders, there would be no direction, there would be no kind of theory of the case. What are we doing here in this administration? It was all Trump's impulses. And can you imagine working for somebody like that?
I would love to continue, as would our home audience, but we have to leave it there. And I wanted to thank you for doing this. There's a lot of fascinating information in this book. You could buy a copy of Rage, along with books by our other festival speakers at our Atlantic Festival page at bookshop.org. Bob, you're a legend. Thank you for joining us, and congratulations on this book. We really appreciate it.
And now, the founder and president of Emerson Collective, Laureen Powell-Jobs.
Our country and the world are in the midst of a pandemic. Here at home, this crisis has laid bare the systemic injustices that have long been ignored. We are also experiencing a moral crisis rooted in our failure to treat one another with the dignity and respect every human life deserves. Joining us now is someone who is addressing that moral crisis by building a movement to engage and mobilize 140 million poor and low-income Americans through his organizations, Repairers of the Breach and the Poor People's Campaign. Welcome, Reverend Barber. Thank you for joining us. As a student of history, you know this. There are periods in American history when we've made large, profound leaps forward. These shifts have come out of our darkest periods as a nation, but we regroup, we regather, we renew the promise, and then create something far beyond. In the words of prison abolitionist scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore, what the world will become already exists in fragments and pieces, experiments and possibilities. As a leader, you see those fragments and possibilities and you translate that. You translate them to all of us so that we can see them too. Through the Poor People's Campaign, you envision and advocate for a much more equal and just society. So I'm hoping we can start this conversation as you describe to everyone listening the pillars of that campaign and how you are building a movement that will become a profound leap forward.
First of all, thank you so much. And in the words of the campaign, forward together and not one step back. Some years ago, Repairers of the Breach, which is one of the co-organizers of the Poor People's Campaign, looked at where we are in this culture. And we started talking about 5 interlocking injustices, 5 that are hurting us as a nation. We decided we had to step outside of the left versus right, the liberal versus conservative, puny categories. And when we look at our deepest moral values, and I'll talk about a little bit about where those values come from later, there are 5 interlocking injustices that are literally trying to strangle the life and stop the heart of this democracy. Systemic racism. And by that, we mean racism in all of its ugly policy forms, voter suppression, mass incarceration, police brutality and killing of innocent Black bodies, resegregation of our public schools. But we also mean redlining and not allowing resources and loans to come into Black communities for economic uplift. But we also mean the denial of justice for our immigrant brothers and sisters, particularly our Latino brothers and sisters. We also mean the continuing mistreatment of our First Nation brothers and sisters. That's systemic racism. And then systemic poverty. Before COVID, 140 million people living in poverty and low wealth in this country, 62 million people working every day without a living wage, many living in their cars. Before COVID, we had millions of people, 87 million people uninsured or underinsured before COVID. 61% of all African Americans poor and low wealth. 60 million white people poor and low wealth, 26 million poor and low wealth white people, 69% of all Latinos and Native people, indigenous people poor and low wealth before COVID. After COVID, we were at 43% of the nation poor and low wealth. After COVID, it's upwards of 50% and growing. And then the third pillar is that we must address ecological devastation. Before COVID, 4 million families could get up every morning and buy unleaded gas and could not buy unleaded water. Before COVID, the highest per capita death rate was in Cancer Alley down in Louisiana before COVID. And then the fourth issue is addressing the war economy. Before COVID, we were spending 54 cents of every discretionary dollar into the war economy and less than 16 cents of every discretionary dollar into healthcare and infrastructure and educating and funding community health centers and so forth and so on. And then finally, we must challenge what we call the immoral, distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism that suggests that all that matters is that you bow to whoever's in power at a particular time, that you're against gay people, that you're against a woman's right to choose, that you're for prayer in the school, for gun rights, and for a particular party, most of the time described as Republican Party. These 5 interlocking injustices, we believe in this campaign, must be addressed, challenged, because they all connect in ways to destroy and undermine the lives of poor and low wealth people, and then ultimately the very lifeblood of this democracy.
Yes. So as you speak about these interlocking injustices and inequities, you often talk about the need for moral fusion, and you hearken back to Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement as you describe that. Can you talk a little bit about the moral fusion that's required to address these deep systemic inequities?
Well, when we talk about morality, and when I talk about it as a public theologian who focuses on public policy, I'm never talking about just what feels good. We're talking about what is right, as right is understood from our deepest religious values and our deepest constitutional values. A moral movement suggests that there are some things that are not about left and right, Democrat and Republican, but right and wrong. And there's some things, if it's a moral issue, it's not an option of whether or not you're going to fight for it. If it's not, it's of life importance. It's a moral imperative. It's a theological necessity. It's what my grandmama called an eternal have to. When you say something is a moral issue, you're saying that my life doesn't even make sense unless I'm on the side of that. Now, this is not new. The abolition, the movement to fight the genocide of indigenous people was a moral issue. The abolition movement were moral issues. The early women's suffrage movement, moral issues. The early fight to provide labor rights and fundamental minimum wages were moral issues. The civil rights movement was a moral movement. And what all of those movements said was basically this: when we look at the state of public policy, and examine that public policy over against the moral traditions, like in the Hebrew Bible where it says in Isaiah 10, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor and women of their children of their rights. Or when Jesus said that a nation would be judged by how it treats the least of these. Or if you're not particularly religious, you look at the Declaration of Independence that says that anytime there has been a long train of abuses against life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that people have a right to alter. In fact, they're called to alter that government. Or you look at the Constitution itself, those moral principles, that every piece of public policy should establish justice. It should provide for the common defense. It should promote the general welfare. It should ensure domestic tranquility and not division. We should have equal protection under law, Yes. Voting rights should be protected in a way that no one can deny or abridge. So those then become moral issues. They're not about party. They're about a principle. And what we mean by moral issues, Laureen, is this. Every piece of public policy, we should do what we call a moral analysis. Does it line up with our deepest moral values? I often say to politicians, if you put your hand on the Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution, you ought to know at least what's in both of them. What's in the Bible, what's in the Constitution. But not only must there be a moral analysis, Laureen, there must be a moral articulation of why poverty is immoral and why it is economically insane and constitutionally inconsistent. But there also must be moral attachment. In other words, helping people to understand that the issues of poverty and race connect. In fact, oftentimes, the same forces that will engage in racism are also the same forces that deny living wages. So we want people to see how adversarially people are connected, but also how when we come together to fight for a more just society and we face all of these issues, we are strong together. And then lastly, we need what we call moral action. And that means
Yeah.
that when it comes to fighting for these issues like living wages, like healthcare, like against voter suppression, against police brutality, we're going to use every moral, nonviolent tool at our disposal, every one of them. Sometimes it'll mean going to jail. Sometimes it'll mean marching in the street. Sometimes it'll be using that nonviolent weapon of voting. But when it's a moral issue, what we're saying is there can never be backing up. There can never be a turning around. We must always fight against systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and this false moral narrative of religious nationalism.
And you have stated that our poor and low-income American brethren are often not engaged in civic life and often don't use that powerful tool of the vote. And so talk a little bit about some of the practical measures that you have in order to enfranchise as many people as possible in this civic activity.
Well, two things happen. Oftentimes, politicians don't even try to engage poor people. That's low-wealth people, which is a great trap. Republicans tend to racialize poverty, and Democrats have tended to run from poverty. People get stuck in a neoliberalism mindset that says either you got trickle down from the top or you got just the middle class. If they lift, you pull everybody, when the fact of the matter is, as someone once said, if a boat is stuck at the bottom, even a rising tide is not going to lift it up. Somebody has to get it unstuck from the mud. And so the reality is, for too long, you think about it. If you think about every presidential debate we have had just since 2016, there had been 1 hour focused on the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, over 50% of our children, even before COVID. And even during COVID, you don't hear a lot about poor and low-wealth people from a policy perspective. We're beginning to hear some of it, but we haven't had one presidential debate. Think about that. 43% of the nation facing something, and not one national debate that commits at least an hour to address these issues. So what we're saying is, first of all, it's a failure of our politics to think you can ignore 43% of the nation. But more than just a moral failure, we now know it's an electoral failure. We just did a study called Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low-Wealth Voters with a professor from Columbia University. We already knew that the same states that were racist voter suppression states were also states that were high poverty states, that racist voter suppression states also elected people who then put laws more on the side of racist police than they did on the side of the people. We knew that. But what we didn't know until this study came out is that poor and low wealth people now represent, Lorraine, nearly a third of the electorate today. Nearly a third. What we did not know is that in 15 states, from Michigan to New Mexico to Mississippi to North Carolina to Wisconsin, poor and low wealth people voted between 1 and 19% higher than they voted in 2016. They could fundamentally shift the outcome of every gubernatorial race, every Senate race, and the presidential race. They could change the margin of victory. Not 21%, just 19%, and the highest is 19%.
Those are small numbers.
Yeah, those are small numbers. It's 1% in Michigan. It's under 10% in Mississippi. It's 19% in North Carolina. Then we found out that there are 63 million poor and low wealth people who did not vote. We found out in the 3 states that Donald Trump won by 80,000 votes that gave him the Electoral College, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, there were 2.1 million poor and low wealth people that did not vote. We found out that of the 63 million poor and low wealth people that did not vote, 34 million didn't vote, 29 million did vote. Now, here's the last thing we found out, which is why we're now doing something called Voting is Power Unleashed. And I would encourage people to go to www.poorpeoplecampaign.org and click on how you can be involved in calling and polling and pushing and reaching out to people and encouraging people to get out to vote. We found out that of those 29 million voted, voted. We asked the question, why don't you vote? Now, this is what we found out. Of those persons making less than $50,000, they vote overwhelmingly for progressives. They don't vote for extremists, but the volume is low. So we asked, well, why don't you vote? The first issue was politicians don't talk to us. They don't talk to us. They don't talk about. So poor and low wealth people are not just apathetic. What they were saying is they don't even talk to us. They don't
hear it in the political discourse.
Right. Exactly right. That was the first issue. The second issue was, well, they're not actually in order. The next issue was transportation and time off. Because if you have a situation where election is a day, a lot of poor and low wealth people can't afford to get off work. They can't get off. Right. A lot don't have transportation. The third issue was voter suppression. Now, we could correct all three of those. We can correct all three of those. We surely can correct the first one, and that is talking to them. Lastly, we did this in Kentucky last year. There was a candidate, Democrat, Republican. The Republican governor had taken away health care, so forth and so on. We went into Kentucky with our friends and we organized in what we call from the holler to the hood. And in 5 counties that were Trump counties, by going in talking to people and saying, well, if the politicians aren't talking to you, then make them listen to you by voting. Do you know they turned 3 of those counties? They're that from being so-called red to progressive county or the blue counties, however you want to describe it, and the governor unseated an incumbent when poor and low wealth people were engaged around issues, and they never endorsed. We never, as a group, as an organization, endorsed the candidate. We endorsed issues, and then the night that and he started running on issues, and people turned out from the hood to the holler. That can happen all over the country. And especially, last thing, it has to happen in the South, because when we complain about the fact in this country that the people who are choosing our Supreme Court justices come from the least populated states, that's the negative. Here's the positive. Those least populated states are also high poverty states and unorganized states. And in all of those least populous states, if you organize poor and low wealth people, 1 to 19% of them, and most of them, you could change who sits in the United States, and in Alabama, and in a Georgia, and in a Mississippi, and in a Virginia, and in North Carolina, Texas, and a New Mexico. And in those 30 states from Maryland to over to New Mexico, that's 193 electoral votes. And it's also 60 members of the United States Senate. Poor and low wealth people are the hope of this country electorally. And it's political suicide not to talk to them.
Thank you. I know we're out of time. I always find it enriching to speak to you. There are few leaders who are more effective or visionary than you are, especially in this era of both disorientation and opportunity. Your voice cuts like a hot knife through butter, through the cynicism and despair. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you're doing and for being the moral light that we need right now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. For history's sake, can I say one thing on camera that you can hold on to?
Yeah, for sure.
It was in 1857. Justice Taney was on the court. He was wrongfully put on the Supreme Court, should have never made it. He presided over the Dred Scott decision that said a black man had no rights that a white person ever had to pay attention to, that black people were not citizens, barely human, if at all, therefore had no rights. 2 months later, Frederick Douglass was asked, what about this decision? And Frederick Douglass in May of 1857 said, this is a monstrous decision. And he said he went down, that's how bad it was. But then he did a turn that we must do. We cannot merely mourn from the standpoint of being going in a corner crying. We have to come out of the corner fighting and have the kind of mourning that is deeply concerned. And so Frederick Douglass said, a decision as monstrous of this should be called what it is. I'm paraphrasing. He went on to say, oppression as organized as that against us will seem invincible right up to the moment it falls. But then he said, there's always another look. He said, David looked invincible until he stood over Goliath. He said, our movement has always looked like it would not work. He said, but the truth of the matter is perhaps this is the final link in the chain to the undoing of the entire system of slavery and oppression. He said, so therefore, we know from history that every attempt to ally and diminish and stop our movement has only served to intensify and embolden our agitation. Today, in 2020, if Frederick Douglass could believe that in 1857, 163 years later, we have no excuse to mourn and cry and act like certain people, i.e. the current president, the current Senate leader, even if they make this decision and wrongfully appoint somebody for Rupert, have the finals to say. If Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and white and black abolitionists didn't quit back then, neither can we now. Instead, these actions must only serve to embolden and intensify our moral agitation for justice, love, and a better democracy, a genuine democracy. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for being here with us this week. Thank you to our subscribers and attendees for your support and engagement. Thank you to all of our speakers and moderators for taking part in the Atlantic Festival. And thank you to all of our teams here at the Atlantic, everyone who helped make this event happen, especially our Atlantic Live team, for your tremendous hard work in adverse circumstances. I hope you enjoyed the program, and if you like what you saw, please support our journalism by becoming a subscriber. We're heading into a tension-filled and dangerous period for our democracy. We've already experienced a year unlike any other in living memory. We promise that, through our journalism, we will try to help you navigate a uniquely fraught election season. I ask you to read our newest cover story by Bart Gellman, who investigates all of the ways in which this coming election could go sideways. It is truly necessary reading. I hope you know by now that we at the Atlantic take our mission of explaining America to itself and to the world, of investigating injustice and inequality, and providing you with the most compelling, illuminating, and entertaining stories very, very seriously. It is my immodest but empirically supported opinion that we have the best team of journalists in the world, and we are working our hardest to help our readers make sense of this moment. We wish you and your families good health and peace of mind. Good night, and we'll see you soon at another Atlantic event. The ambitious journalism you see here tonight and across print and online can't be made without your support. Please become a subscriber today. You'll get unlimited access to the incredible journalism of theatlantic.com, 10 issues a year of our unrivaled print magazine, and much, much more.